Twilight of the Superheroes, The Interminable Ramble by Alan Moore. The world of Twilight is not a world where the superheroes have deliberately taken over, but one where they have inherited the Earth almost by default as various social institutions started to crumble in the face of accelerating social change, leaving the superheroes in the often unwilling position of being a sort of new royalty. Even though government and civic authority has all but disintegrated, the various areas of America each have their own coteries of protecting superfolk to look after them, and the superheroes have thus tended to group into clans, each looking after a certain province. There are numerous houses of this nature, dividing America up into a kind of feudal barony system effectively. What I want to show is a world which, having lived through the terrors of the 50s and the early 90s with an overhanging terror of a nuclear Armageddon that seemed inevitable at the time, has found itself faced with the equally inconceivable and terrifying notion that there might not be an apocalypse, that mankind might actually have a future, and might thus be faced with the terrifying prospect of having to deal with it rather than allowing himself the indulgence of getting rid of that responsibility with a convenient mushroom cloud or 900. They find themselves clinging to the various superhero clans which represent their only anchor of stability in this rapidly altering world. At the time in which our central Twilight story takes place, there are 8 houses, each containing a different superhero clan, scattered across America. Although, as we shall see, some of these are pretty well abandoned or non-functioning in any active sense. I'll deal with these one at a time and introduce our main characters along the way, house by house. The houses of the heroes. The houses: House of Steel, House of Thunder, House of Titans, House of Mystery, House of Secrets, House of Justice, House of Tomorrow, House of Lanterns. House of Steel. This is one of the 2 most powerful clans, and it dominates the eastern seaboard around New York and environs. Alternately, if I change my mind, it could be outside America altogether and set in the Arctic Circle, based around a new fortress of solitude. This is because the House of Steel consists of the clan founded by Superman. We have Superman himself, a morally troubled figure who doesn't know what's best to do about the chaos he sees surrounding him, but who has come to accept that the houses provide the only real permanent structure in a destabilizing world and are thus important to maintain. Superman has married and raised a couple of kids, and the person that he has married is Wonder Woman, who has had an identity change to Superwoman to accommodate her new stature. We see the genuine and powerful love between these 2 in the face of the perils of the world surrounding them and the desire to do what's best. They are also troubled by their 2 offspring. One of these is a new Superboy, and he's about 18 when the story opens, and he's real bad news. The other child is a less delinquent Supergirl, a new one who, like Superboy, has been born of the union between Superman and Wonder Woman, but who is much kinder and gentler, more her mother's child. Having 3 members in the Superman class and Wonder Woman, Superwoman, herself, they are obviously a clan to be reckoned with. House of Thunder. The House of Thunder is the other major power and possesses members with power in the same class as that of House of Steel. The House of Thunder is composed of the Marvel family plus additions. Captain Marvel himself is the patriarch and is, if possible, even more estranged and troubled by the state of the world than Superman is, perhaps because the Marvel family are having to come to terms with the difficulties of having human alter egos along with everything else, a point I'll return to when I outline the plot. Alongside Captain Marvel, there is Mary Marvel, who the Captain has married more to form a bona fide clan in opposition to that of Superman than for any other reason. There is also Captain Marvel Jr., now an adult superhero every bit as powerful and imposing as Captain Marvel in his prime, but forced to labor under the eternal shadow of a senior protege. To complicate things, Captain Marvel Jr. and Mary Marvel are having an affair behind the captain's back, Guinevere and Lancelot style, which has every bit as dire consequences as in the Arthurian legends. The other member of the Marvel clan is Mary Marvel Jr., the daughter of Captain and Mary Marvel Sr. Mary Jr. is fated to be part of a planned arranged marriage to the nasty, delinquent Superboy during the course of our story, in order to form a powerful union between the two houses. Peripheral to all this, but perhaps interesting, somewhere in the House of Thunder, which rises up from the middle of Los Angeles over the west coast, by the way, there are headquarters occupied by those characters from the Fawcett universe who can no longer cope with life in an increasingly realistic and difficult outside world. These include a sad and aging Mr. Talkie Tawny, and perhaps even Mr. Mind. Please don't laugh. I think I can make it work. The houses of Steel and Thunder face each other across the country, with the various minor houses and constellations gathered somewhere in between, vying for the power that's left over after the two major houses have had their share. House of Titans. One of the two foremost clans making up this collection of lesser houses is a clan composed of the remains of the Teen Titans, now grown up and a hell of a lot grimmer and more frightening than they ever were in the past. They are led by an adult Nightwing who, trying to emulate and live up to the reputation of the Batman, has become every bit as driven and vicious as his mentor, but who lacks the depth of compassion and understanding that separates the Batman from all other grim vigilantes. As a result, Nightwing is not an altogether nice character. This isn't helped by the fact that Starfire has been killed some years earlier during a period when all the aliens were being forcibly expelled from Earth by the big powers, who feared alien influence moving in to take advantage of the disruption and uncertainty in society. Other Titans who have died include Jericho, while some, including Kid Flash and Wonder Girl, have left the Titans to take up with other clans, a cause of bitterness amongst the remaining Titans. These include an adult version of the Hawk, formerly of the Hawk and the Dove, who is maybe renamed Warhawk and who only lives up to his name, a sort of super Rambo who Nightwing tends to use as a human weapon. There is also the Cyborg. Vic Stone has had some rejection problems with his bioelectronic parts in the time that's elapsed since our present day, and as a result, more and more of his body has been replaced by mechanical parts, including one lobe of his brain. He is forced into considering the frightening question of when exactly something stops being a person and starts being a machine. How much do you have to take out and replace before there's just a robot left? One thing that helps take Stone's mind off his own problems is that he must keep an eye on the Changeling, who has serious problems of his own. When the terrors of the world finally became too much for his hokey, light-hearted facade, the Changeling did what he always said he'd do. He went crazy. Not completely crazy, but more and more these days he stays in animal form, or worse, in some awful halfway form between the human and the animal. Worse still, increasingly these days he's starting to adapt the forms of animals that don't exist outside the increasingly tortured confines of his mind. Before the story is out, he will have adopted a new identity, calling himself the Chimera. The only other Titan is Raven, who is now an aging, very dignified sorceress. She stays with the Titans out of loyalty for the way they stayed with her in the past when she had troubles, but increasingly she finds herself drawn to the tempting notion of leaving the House of Titans and moving into one of the other houses, which is far more suited for her. This being the next house on our agenda for discussion, House of Mystery. Nothing to do with the previous House of Mystery except in name. This House of Mystery is built around Baron Winter's Georgetown mansion and is the residence of a number of DC supernatural characters. These include Jason Blood, aka the Demon, Maybe the Spectre, Zatara, Dr. Fate, and a strange amalgam of Baron Winter and Deadman. Baron Winter has had his mind burned out in a psychic battle some years earlier and is now just an empty shell, except when he's inhabited by the spirit of Boston Brand, who uses the Baron's body as a kind of holiday home in the land of the living. The other person in residence in this new House of Mystery is a reformed Felix Faust, The supernatural presences at the house have very little to do with the outside world, and have instead devoted their pooled knowledge and talents to plumbing the depths of the universe's many mysteries, being all but inactive in the world of men. House of Secrets. Again, similar only to its predecessor in name, this House of Secrets is the residence of a rough conglomerate of the few surviving supervillains that haven't been wiped out in an earlier Justice League-headed purge on supervillains, which makes up part of the historical background of our story. The villains, all considerably older than today, who make up this fraternity, are roughly as follows, subject to revision: Luthor, the Joker, Gorilla Grodd, Captain Cold, Catwoman, Kronos, and Star Sapphire, along with maybe Dr. Savannah and a couple of others. This house is powerful enough to defend itself against occasional attacks by the other hero-centered clans, but it isn't otherwise especially active and thus tends to get left alone, largely because the province that these villains protect, somewhere up in the reaches of Nevada, is just as well looked after as the places controlled by the heroes, whereby hangs some sort of moral. The House of Justice. The House of Justice, built around the remains of the JLA's old cavern headquarters, is the residence of the remains of the Justice League. These are the most important of the lesser houses, along with the Titans. The lineup of the Justice League at the time of our story includes Captain Atom and the Blue Beetle, an Aqualad that has grown up to be the new Aquaman, and a Wonder Girl who has taken on the mantle of Wonder Woman after Wonder Woman herself opted to become Superwoman upon marrying Superman. In addition to this, there is the Flash, Wally West, and the new female Flash, Slipstream, although I prefer the name Joni Quick, but this is by the by. There is also Captain Comet and the new female Dr. Light. House of Tomorrow. This is the house built by all the various exiles from other eras who have been trapped in this world by the Time Trapper's flux. These include Rip Hunter and some members of the Legion, but since anyone passing through that strip of time stream at any time in the future or past would be sucked into that time zone as well, there are a paradoxical number of past and future selves of the various time travelers also caught there, including 2 or 3 different Rip Hunters and 2 or 3 versions of the Legion at different stages in their development. Other time travelers might very well include Tommy Tomorrow and maybe even an earlier version of the Time Trapper himself, who might very well provide the help these stranded travelers need to return to their own times. It strikes me that amongst these travelers there might also be Space Ranger and Jonah Hex. This might even be an opportunity to return Jonah Hex to his original Western continuity, where we know he will eventually end up, according to previous DC history. The people at the House of Tomorrow aren't terribly active, since they are trying their best not to influence events going on around them too much, with an eye to possible repercussions in the future if they mess around with the time stream in the past. Also, their energies are mainly directed to finding a way out of their time trap, which, as I mentioned, is a problem that might be solved by a past self of the Time Trapper himself. House of Lanterns. The House of Lanterns at the time our story opens is abandoned and shattered, since all the Green Lanterns, being self-confessed agents of an alien power, the Guardians, have been banished from Earth during the anti-alien purges mentioned earlier, which resulted in Starfire's death, and which also resulted in the banishment from Earth of the Martian Manhunter, the Hooks, and any other alien characters I may have forgotten. Superman, since his own alien culture no longer exists, and since he has lived on Earth since infancy, has been made a citizen of the United States, and is thus exempt. Anyway, while the House of Lanterns no longer exists upon Earth, an emergency House of Lanterns has been set up upon one of the moons of Mars. There's one that seems from radio telescope scans to be either hollow or riddled with caves, but I can't remember whether it's Phobos or Deimos. Here the exiled Green Lanterns conspire with other space powers, including the Rands and Thanagarians, to restore their power on Earth. The spice powers, knowing through their intelligence sources of the imminent joining of the Houses of Steel and the House of Thunder by marriage, are afraid that such a union will enable the Super Marvel family to bring all the houses under control and unify Earth as a resourceful planet ruled by a pantheon of invincible gods. The spice people fear that such an empire might soon set its sights upon territories that are currently the province of the Hawks, Guardians, or Martians. The actual Green Lanterns residing in the House of Lanterns at this time are a reformed Sinestro, Carol Ferris, and Guy Gardner. Green Lanterns of Earth, Sodal Yacht, the Daxamite ultimate Green Lantern, whose existence I hinted at in a story me and Kevin did for the Green Lantern Calls Annual, and maybe an aging Tomar Rai, just because I'd like to see what parrot men look like when they get old. Drunks, hookers, and panhandlers. Okay, so that's about it for the houses. Not all the superheroes, however, are actually members of clans. Those who aren't in clans are almost totally inactive, and for the most part inhabit one of the rundown barrio areas of either Gotham or Metropolis, both cities transformed beyond anything we've seen previously by the passage of time and change. The way I see it, the scenarios in the barrio will take up much of the book and will probably be some of the livelier ones. The barrio is a superhero slum where all the old heroes come to die. As I see it, almost every passerby, shopkeeper, and incidental background character there used to be some sort of super character or other 20 years ago. A lot of them are drunks, some of them are hookers or panhandlers. The majority eke whatever living they can out of dead-end jobs, while there are a few who have actually adapted to their changed circumstances quite successfully, and certain others who still actively carry on their own personal vendettas against injustice, albeit secretly. I'll list these various characters one at a time, mainly because I have fairly specific ideas about all of them that I'd like to get across, so you'll know who we're talking about before I get on to the actual plot. Most of the following have been altered almost beyond recognition, so this is fairly necessary. John Constantine. Constantine is about 20 years older, but obviously hasn't changed a bit, except for the fact that he's living with a woman and has been for the past 15 years. This woman might even turn out to be the Fever character that I introduced in my two-part vigilante story a while back. Anyway, her and Constantine are, to all intents and purposes, married, and are obviously loving it. Constantine is still into the same sort of scams and wheeler dealing, and in the whole story of Twilight, he seems to be the only character who has his finger upon all the pulses and knows exactly what is going on in this maze of plot and counterplot between the various factions involved. He thus became a central character in the story, and it strikes me that Constantine would probably be a logical choice to launch into his own title off the back of this crossover, if you're looking for characters to do that with. Sandy's Place. Sandy's Place is one of the pivotal settings in our story. It's the main ballroom in the barrio, and thus acts as a meeting point for a lot of the characters involved. Its proprietress is Sandra Knight, formerly the Phantom Lady. I'll run through the main characters who hang out at her joint, starting with the lady herself, the Phantom Lady. Sandra Knight is now somewhere approaching 50 and has a sort of ripe, down-at-heel Joan Collins sexuality to her still. She runs the bar and acts as a sort of den mother to all the regulars who drift in there, maybe occasionally sleeping with one of them for old time's sake, although never anything lasting or serious. She's a nice woman, doing her best to get by in a difficult world, who nevertheless seems to have a lot of care and affection to lavish on others, as evidenced by her care of the next member of our cast up for discussion, the Doll Man. Daryl Dine is probably the most unsettling and pitiful character in our cast, even though we don't see much of him. What has happened, basically, is that the constant shrinking and growing, plus the effects of the square cube law with regard to size increase, have taken their toll upon him. As the years passed, his bones became brittle and would break easily if he stayed at normal size for too long. Eventually, it became easier to stay at 6 inches tall all the time, but this itself was not the end to the problem
Remaining at a constant 6 inches, Dane's body and brain began to adapt to their new size, redistributing their mass and aging their neurons for greater comfort and effectiveness. As a result, Dane has slowly changed shape into a horrible, elongated insect man, still 6 inches high, whose bone structure has altered dramatically into something barely recognizable as anything that used to be human, although just recognizable enough to be disturbing. His brain has also had to change to accommodate drastically reduced brain size and capacity. He's still intelligent, but it's a non-human intelligence, and he can barely communicate coherently with normal humans anymore. Sandra Knight has taken him under her wing. She keeps him in a vivarium behind the bar. It brings in enough money to pay for his food, and he's too alien to mind being displayed like this, so what the hell? Although she feels bad about it. And Sandy is almost the only person that the former doll man can talk to and make himself understood. She's also the only person unselfish enough to be able to bear the creepy little bastard running up her arm to nestle on her shoulder and talk into her ear in his eerie, piping, almost inaudible voice. Daryl Dane, while he's the only person other than Sandy who lives at the bar full-time in his tank, is not the only lame duck that Sandy extends her sympathy to. Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam is the character I'm most looking forward to writing, taking my cue from both the character of Uncle Sam in Robert Coover's excellent book about the Rosenberg execution, The Public Burning, and from the portrayal of Richard Nixon on Robert Altman's Secret Honor. In Coover's book, there's a sort of giant called Uncle Sam, who is exactly like the old quality character right down to his dialogue, which is a sort of breathless rush of manic cornball philosophy and darkly lyric jingoism. He talks endlessly about his exploits, boasting Paul Bunyan style about how he strode across the sea up to his red and white striped thighs in the deepest waters of the Pacific and rooted out his arch enemy, the Phantom, wherever he should strike. In the Altman film, there is a harrowing portrait of Richard Nixon putting himself through a solitary self-confessional, sitting in a lonely room and vomiting his history into a tape recorder, helplessly spilling out all the things that he'll never be able to tell another living soul for fear of his life. All the stuff about Watergate that nobody ever suspected, all the stuff about Kissinger and the Shah, all the places where the bodies are buried. As I see my Uncle Sam, he's a hopeless derelict with no power at all, and nobody is even entirely sure whether he actually is the Uncle Sam or some wino dressed up like him. He sprawls in a dark corner of the bar, drinking the last years of his life away, and babbling to himself in a mixture of the two styles outlined above, his cornball jingoistic reminiscences occasionally leading his erratic memory up alleyways in the American past down which he'd rather not stray, since his ramblings will have a kind of dark poetry to them. I see him acting as a sort of surreal Greek chorus or something, his senile monologues having suggestive resonance within the main framework of the story. Black Hawk. He has a perfect pair of prosthetic legs to replace his own legs, which, Douglas Bader style, are now missing. He is a sinister and obsessive figure, still fighting a private war inside his head, which has never quite been the same since the mission in which all his teammates died and in which he lost his legs. He lives in a single room in the barrio, paid for out of the remains of the fortune that once funded Black Hawk Island. I figure at some point in the Second World War he got his hands on some Nazi gold and still has a reserve of it somewhere, albeit a dwindling one. Gold is more than ever a firm economic unit in the chaotic economic flux situation of this future world, so he could probably afford to live a less Spartan existence. He just doesn't want to, rising at 5 every morning and strapping on his legs before working out in the gym and the flight simulator that he keeps at a secret location downtown. In the evenings he maybe calls in at Sandy's place for a glass of Perrier before going on to cruise around the barrio's leather bars. At the bars, he singles out young men according to some system known only to him and offers them unemployment in some unspecified endeavor. We eventually find out that he is recruiting a new squadron of Black Hawks to replace his dead friends, and that he has 7 F-3 bombers hidden in a massive underground hangar that he has invested the remains of his gold into. He picks up boys and asks them their names. Maybe one of them says, "My name's Charles." Black Hawk pats him on the shoulder and smiles and says, "I think I'll call you Chuck." A boy called Andrew becomes Andre, and so on. Black Hawk is a sort of obsessive urban fascist with a survivalist mentality and a strong sociopathic streak. You can take the boy out of the war, but you sometimes can't take the war out of the boy, and Black Hawk's new squadron will almost certainly figure prominently in the explosive climax to this series. Plastic Man. Like most of the old quality characters, Plastic Man often calls by at Sandy's before moving on uptown to look for trade. Plastic Man is a male prostitute or gigolo or whatever the polite term might be. Thanks to his elastic consistency, he can keep himself looking young and attractive for a lot longer than many of his fellows, and it is this facet of his talent that he now exploits for a living. He is employed by the seductive Winks escort agency managed by one W. Winks. He is, in fact, the only employee of the agency. He is likable and kind, despite his shady occupation, and everyone gets on with him, with traces of his past as E.L. O'Brien finally starting to show through. He is a sort of active and romantic neighbourhood hoodlum who always dresses well and buys flowers for the old ladies and drinks for bums and apples for kids. There is a more sombre side to him that he probably only reveals to old friends like Sandy, who is the only person that he'll sleep with for nothing these days. Although he seems permanently youthful, he has started to notice a lessening of the elasticity in the skin around his lower back. It's becoming saggy and feels like crepe, like something that has been stretched once or twice too often and is becoming shapeless. Plastic Man has a sort of horrible, half-formed vision in his head that he doesn't like to think about concerning how he might finally end up. He might end up as just a puddle. He often wakes up screaming in the dead of night from dreams about this, and the shades that he habitually wears now are there to hide the tired and worried look around his eyes as much as anything else. Woozy Winks is a roguishly half-likeable but mostly disgusting old pimp who will get a phone call from Kathy Kane. Yeah, I know, the Earth 1 Batwoman died, but the one on Earth 2 didn't, and has presumably been living in anonymous retirement on Earth Composite ever since the crisis, and notify Plas, who will go round to her mansion to keep Miss Kane company for the evening, giving Woozy a cut of the subsequent monies. I see Plastic Man as being a sort of reluctant hero who'll come through in the end. Okay, those are the main characters who hang out at Sandy's, although most of the other characters pass through from time to time. These include Congorilla, another character that I'm looking forward to doing, and one of the nastiest characters in our assembled cast. Basically, what has happened to Bill is that he got old. His human body got older and older, while at the rub of a ring he could transmit his body to that of a powerful and immortal sacred golden gorilla. Ask yourself, what would you do? Anyway, Bill eventually decided to stay in the body of the gorilla forever, and now is quite a wealthy and successful local businessman, a golden gorilla wearing a business suit and even managing to talk just about recognizably, even if some of it has to be done in sign language. The sort of operation he runs is a sort of lucrative small-time criminal organization that services the bars and gambling dens and also supplies most of the barrio's drug traffic. His activities will bring him into contact with lots of other characters, putting protection pressures on Sandy's bar, for example, or having Woozy Winks beaten up for non-union pimping, and assuming that the barrio is set in the remains of Gotham, which I'm starting to favour more and more, then effectively he becomes the new guerrilla boss of Gotham City. He has a dark secret in his closet, however, almost literally. The body of Congo Bill, now over 90 years old, refuses to die. The gorilla mind that has been trapped in it unfairly refuses to let go and is hanging on with a fierce and horrible willpower. Unable to bring himself to kill it outright,
Congarilla keeps the shackled and naked old man in special rooms at his apartment, feeds it garbage, and hopes it will die soon. But it doesn't. It just lies in the corner and snarls weakly when he enters and fixes him with its ancient glaring eyes as he gives it its food. Green Arrow and Black Canary. Oliver and Dinah have both retired from costume crime fighting and are now co-editors of a small but vital and thriving radical newspaper that serves the barrio and will be useful in getting over background information quickly and stylishly. Oliver and Dinah are two of the nicest and most normal people in the series, both fiercely committed and tireless in their efforts, both loving each other very much despite the violent rows that they have learned to weather and almost come to enjoy as part of their relationship. Their paper is called Black Feathers, and on its masthead there is a symbol of a drawn-back arrow about to be fired, fletched with black flight feathers. The Question. The Question is a freelance investigator, a sort of masked Philip Marlowe who doesn't make very much money and who usually ends up taking cases just for the interest or the moral necessity. He's quite good friends with Oliver and Dinah and often gives them the inside dope on situations that he has knowledge of for reporting in Black Feathers. Him and Oliver have strong political differences but are firm friends despite this. When our story opens, The Question is investigating an impossible locked-room murder, the Batman. Nobody's actually seen him for years. He's rumoured to be around. He's rumoured to be active and rumoured to be doing something, but nobody knows what or even really if. He might have died years ago. The Shadow. See, the Batman. In actual fact, these two crime fighters have joined forces in a clandestine bid to rid the earth of the oppressive and dominating superhero houses forever, so that mankind can get on with its own destiny. We don't learn this until later in the series, although they play a big part in the ending. As an aside, are Tarzan and Doc Savage in the public domain yet? No big deal, but I'd really like a sort of secret council of the immortals, Batman, the Shadow, Doc Savage and Tarzan, all planning to start the revolution that will rid Earth of the super people forever. Being basically more elemental forces than people, these characters have remained exactly the same, except they got tougher. The Metal Men. Very few of these survive. Platinum is working as a waitress in a weird sci-fi auto-sex bar, while Iron is working as a construction worker, slowly corroding and losing his faculties as the rust claims his mind. No hope of a resurrection should he be damaged, since creator Will Magnus passed away years ago. Tin is destroyed, as is Mercury. Gold has gone into hiding, mainly because of the fact that, as mentioned earlier, gold is more in demand than ever, and there are a lot of people who would like to capture him and melt him down. We get to see Gold towards the end, but he isn't much in evidence throughout the rest of the series. The Metal Men with the strangest fate is Lead, who has become an animated part of the shielding surrounding a closed-down nuclear reactor that is still considered to be dangerous. As a result of his activities, Lead is radioactive and will not be able to go near anyone for about 6 million years. The Metal Men are not major characters, but I think we should be able to get some darkly comic stuff out of them, as well as a lot of genuine poignance. Robot Man. Still alive and clanking after all these years, this former Doom Patrol member is one of the few people hanging around the barrio who still has an ear amongst the superheroes in the houses. He is friendly with Cyborg of the Titans, who he is maybe helping to adjust to his new, mostly robotic state. He also has contact with the Justice League, since he was once close to the Teen Titans, and since 3 ex-Titans, Wonder Girl, Kid Flash, and Aqualad are now amongst the Justice League membership. Mostly though, he just hangs around the barrios, maybe going out for an evening at the cinema with Platinum when she's finished work, or calling by at the construction site to talk to Iron. I figure a character who can cross the social boundaries will be useful, and it's nice to have someone from the Doom Patrol represented. Adam Strange.
Adam Strange is trapped on Earth, but is still in contact with the alien alliance based around the new House of Lanterns on the moon of Mars. He is a sort of mole, and he will eventually figure largely into the aliens' plan to invade Earth and liberate it from superhero dominance. We see him around a lot, but don't realise who he is until near the end of the series. One thing that this series will enable us to do, if it should be called for, is to simply introduce a new and revamped group like the Challengers of the Unknown, like an established fact, to try them out on the reader before launching them in a new title, which should be borne in mind. The plot, the framing device, the central plot. Okay, I think that's about it as far as character sketches go, so I'll get down to a sketchy outline of the central plot. This is the area I have the least worked out in detail, although I have the overall picture pretty clearly, so maybe I'll just trust to luck and hope it all comes together as I go along. If not, I hope you'll bear with me, and I'll clarify and polish the weak points at some later date. As before, since the plot comes in two sections with the central narrative and the framing linking device, I'll discuss the plot in two parts for the sake of greater clarity, starting with a description of the events that make up the framing sequence. As before, this is a time travel story. Telling things in a chronological sequence is sometimes difficult to do without getting muddled, but I'll give it my best shot. The framing device. The plot of the framing device is as follows. The story starts at its ending in a one-page prologue that takes place at the end of 1987 in a bar someplace in New York. John Constantine sits drinking alone, looking very bitter and pissed off at somebody or other. A striking and personable blonde enters the bar and, noticing Constantine, leans over and asks him for a light. Constantine, sitting there with a crumpled letter in one bunched fist and a glass in the other, glances up at her and then stares at her as if transfixed. We close up on his face, then move into flashback. Basically, the whole series is what passes through Constantine's mind in the 2 seconds it takes him to respond to the girl asking him for a light. We flash back to the beginning of 1987, when Constantine is surprised by a visit from Rip Hunter, who he doesn't know, but who appears to know everything about Constantine, including some very personal details that Constantine has never told another living soul about. Intrigued, Constantine listens to Hunter's story. Hunter tells him about how he's been marooned in time for subjective months, stranded at the House of Tomorrow in the world of Twilight. Hunter tells him about how, in this world, he had met up with an older version of John Constantine, who was somehow instrumental in Hunter's escape back to his own time, after the events to be chronicled in Twilight have concluded. This elder Constantine, explaining about the flux that exists in the time stream, explains that there is a better than good chance that of the potential future Earths waiting in the fluke down the time stream from our present, this future Earth is the one most likely to actually happen, with all of its chaos and carnage. It's a world of war, and it ends with all the super beings either killed or exiled from Earth forever. Giving Hunter enough personal information to convince the younger Constantine and get him to aid Hunter in his mission to alert people concerned and avert this nightmare future, the elder Constantine sends Hunter back in time with his dire story of horrors waiting in the future that must be averted. Hearing Hunter's tale, although the readers don't hear it at all at first, Constantine the Younger is convinced enough to help the time traveler contact some of the various personages affected and tell them the bits of the story that are relevant to them, maybe in their own books or maybe in Twilight itself. This framing device has its own resolution, but I'll leave that till later. The central plot. This is the central plot of Twilight, being the story that Hunter tells Constantine and that Constantine passes on to the other parties involved, and it deals with the world of the Twilight. I don't have it broken down issue by issue or anything, but the rough shape of it is something like this. In the middle 1995 or earlier, when society was starting to break down, many of the villains on Earth tried to take advantage of this situation by exploiting the uncertainty and disaster. Incensed by this, the current Justice League decided to go on the offensive for the first time and plan a careful campaign that will remove all the supervillains forever. They enlist the aid of a lot of other superheroes in this, and they are mostly very effective. So effective, in fact, that they begin to be seen as the only effective force for reason and order in a fast crumbling world. This goes to the assembled heroes' heads a little, and in an attempt to secure the new power base, they pass a majority motion outlawing aliens from Earth. While this passed and is rigorously enforced, it is one of the decisions that causes the first serious rift in the ranks of the assembled superdoers, with some small groups like the Titans starting to drift away from the main group. This process continues until the state of the ruling houses is pretty much as described above, with the House of Secrets containing the only supervillains to survive the purge other than those who reformed, and the House of Lanterns demolished upon Earth and temporarily relocated upon Mars pending the planned secret invasion. At the start of our story proper, there is quite a lot of different activity going on in the various camps. The Houses of Steel and Thunder, each suffering their own internal stresses, are preparing for the marriage of the delinquent Superboy with Mary Marvel Jr., daughter of the Captain and Mary Sr. This is a development that causes considerable anxiety all over the place. Previously, even the two most powerful houses could not attempt to exert any pressure upon the others for fear that the other houses would unite against them. Both houses knew that individually they couldn't hope to take on the assembled might of the Titans, Justice League, and others. This preserved a status quo of sorts. However, with the prospect of an alliance in the offing, it seemed quite possible that the assembled forces of 3 people with the power of Superman, 4 people with the power of Captain Marvel, and Wonder Woman into the bargain could easily smash the most firm resistance. This prospect worries both the houses of Titans and Justice tremendously. It also worries the villains remaining at the House of Secrets, who remember back to the purges of the 90s and shudder. It certainly alarms the people living in the barrio who, though downtrodden, still have a certain amount of liberty, impoverished though it may be, and are not actually living under the absolute dictatorship that could result from a marriage between the Houses of Steel and Thunder. The other major party alarmed by the prospect are the assembled alien forces that are conspiring out on the moon of Mars. They don't like the thought of a planet ruled by an unstoppable superhuman elite purely because it might very quickly pose a threat to the aliens' own well-being. Their plan is cryptic, but we learn a little bit of it at a time. The main thrust of their plan is that they intend to use Adam Strange's place to set up a Zeta Beam link through which an invading army of Hawk people, superpowered Green Lanterns, and members of the Green Lantern Corps could materialize in the center of Times Square or somewhere. This plan being linked to a Thanagarian plan that has to be abandoned in the current issues of Swamp Thing, resurrected here to much more spectacular purpose. Okay, so that's the rough background. Down at Sandy's, the bums are hanging out, Uncle Sam muttering in the corner, Plastic Man dropping by for a drink with Black Hawk before they both go to cruise the bars uptown, Doll Man scuttling around in his vivarium, and so on. Oliver and Dinah are publishing their newspaper, with the Question occasionally dropping by for a political argument with Ollie or to pass on a bit of information. His current case is one that has him totally mystified. The body is found bound and gagged, with his neck broken by a single clean blow. The room was locked, with no possible exit. The call girl was gone. There was no murder weapon. This little conundrum will continue to puzzle them throughout the series until we get to a few shaking revelations at the end. In the houses themselves, things are unsettled. At the House of Steel, both Superman and Super Wonder Woman are worried about their delinquent son and his increasingly difficult to conceal tendencies towards sadism and sociopathic behavior. They are also worried about their daughter, who they cannot find a suitable suitor for since Captain Marvel Jr. doesn't appear to be interested in her. Captain Marvel Jr.'s disinterest is largely due to the fact that he is madly and passionately in love with Mary Marvel Sr. and is liaising with her behind Captain Marvel Sr.'s back. Their relationship has grown difficult of late, largely because the increasingly erratic and cranky behavior of the captain seems to have taken a turn for the worse. All of the Marvel family have had problems with the fact that they have two sets of bodies, neither of which ever age in the slightest, but Mary and Junior have solved this by more or less giving up their human identities. This doesn't worry them, mainly because they're a lot closer to the age of their counterpart than, say, Billy Batson to his alter ego. I should point out that for reasons I've yet to find a good explanation for, the Marvel family seems to grow in their superhuman forms to an ideal age and then stop. Thus, Mary and Junior are both around 25 in their superhuman forms, as is Captain Marvel himself, since he is already the ideal age and hasn't grown up any more in the intervening years. All three are still children if they happen to say Shazam, but the only one who still uses the word is the big red choice himself, unable to give up his human self as Mary and Junior have done. Hanging on to his Billy Batson identity has caused a lot of problems for the captain, as well as in his relationship with his wife, but these seem to have become a lot better recently. Now, however, there is a new element that is perhaps even more threatening. Whereas before Captain Marvel was wrapped up enough in his personal problems to leave Mary and Junior lots of time together, lately he has started to make more normal marital demands upon Mary's time. He's even being extra nice to her, which worries her like anything. There are other oddities of behaviour. The captain will no longer go down and sit and talk with Mr. Tokitoni, as had been a regular habit of his. In the midst of all this, there are problems with Mary Jr., who really doesn't want to marry Superboy at all. In the background of all this, we see John Constantine moving around amongst the various characters, gathering a bit of information here and there, obviously conducting some sort of plan that he has in mind. Remember, this is the older Constantine we're talking about here. He seems to be paying particular attention to the areas of stress between the various houses, and it becomes quickly apparent that although he's older, he's still in the habit of manipulating people in various cryptic ways for reasons unclear to anyone but himself. As things progress, we see the paranoia concerning the coming wedding between the houses of Steel and Thunder amongst the lesser houses start to come to a boiling point. The Titans, directed by a ruthless and embittered Nightwing, maybe approach the Justice League, proposing that the two houses should join forces, along with maybe the villains in the House of Secrets, to stand against the possible threat of being overrun by the houses of Steel and Thunder. Maybe an uneasy alliance is formed between the three houses, although the houses of Mystery and Tomorrow are not at all interested in joining. A plan starts to emerge for a massed attack upon the houses of Steel and Thunder, perhaps even on the wedding day itself, in the hope that both houses can be eliminated and the country divided up between the victors. Meanwhile, we see Black Hawk continuing to recruit his new Black Hawks, and we see Constantine starting to step up his plan, making contact with more and more of the people he's going to need to accomplish it. For one thing, we see him finally manage to make contact with the elite council of the Shadow, the Batman, and maybe Doc Savage and Tarzan as well, and learn of their plan to oust all the superheroes from Earth. Constantine seems eager to help them with this, although we aren't sure about how much of a double game he's playing. He also makes contact with Adam Strange, and though gaining Strange's confidence, learns of the aliens' planned attack upon Earth. Constantine seems eager to help with this plan as well. In fact, as Constantine brushes against the various groups involved, it becomes clear that he is promising his undivided assistance to all of them. It is maybe during this period that he calls at the House of Tomorrow and makes the acquaintance of Rip Hunter, who also figures in his plans. Beyond this, he also spends a lot of time hanging out with the Question and around the offices of Black Feathers, seeming to be everywhere at once as he works his dubious and incomprehensible scheme. As the plot builds up in momentum, it is this ingenious and baffling juggling act of Constantine's that becomes the main attraction. We see him urging on the Justice League and Titans to their attack upon the Houses of Thunder and Steel, and yet we see him call at the Houses of Thunder and speak to Captain Marvel himself, telling him of the planned attack. This is a key scene. Constantine tells the captain of the attack and asks him not to do anything to help the House of Steel in the thick of the battle. When the captain politely asks Constantine why he should do this when he is, after all, supposedly intent upon cementing the union between the houses of steel and thunder, lighting a cigarette, Constantine smiles and says that he thinks the captain already knows what the reasons are. The captain flinches back from the match as Constantine strikes it with a look of terror which passes, changing into a smile at Constantine's cleverness. He agrees to go along with Constantine as far as it suits his own plans, while urging the Titans and Justice League to strike while the iron is hot, and simultaneously urging Captain Marvel not to defend his allies. Constantine is at the same time urging the Batman and Shadow group to hold back in their attack upon the superheroes until a more advantageous time. After he has explained his plan to them, although not to the reader, they agree. On top of all this, Constantine is acting as a fifth columnist to the planned alien invasion through Adam Strange. He urges Strange to commence the alien invasion after the Titans and League and the Houses of Steel and Thunder have had a chance to weaken and decimate each other at the wedding. This sounds sensible, and they readily agree. In the barrio, he is seen at various times searching for two people. One of these is the vanished metal man, Gold. The other is an old man who is reputed to live somewhere in the barrio that nobody knows the history of. Eventually, Constantine finds both of these. Gold, after leading him on with some story or other, he tricks cruelly and has melted down. The old man, when he finds him, he is much more careful with. I don't know when I'll reveal the information, but this man is in fact Metron, formerly of the New Gods, banished to Earth for some treachery that he's committed in the past, when the temptation to uncover new knowledge became too much for the feeble moral restraints that he places upon himself. What Constantine wants with Metron is fairly straightforward. He wants the Mobius chair, although we don't find out why until later. I should point out that these various plot threads will be spread out dramatically, intercut with developments in the lives of other characters, so it won't all be about John Constantine, endearing though I obviously find him. For example, while planning their raid upon the Houses of Steel and Thunder, the assembled houses of Titans, Justice, and Secrets will attempt to press gang various heroes in the barrio into their army with mixed results. Some of the barrio heroes either reluctantly or willingly go along with the revolutionary houses, while some other people are enlisted by Constantine to aid in his master plan. When we finally have the various factions set up and defined, even if there are some ambiguous areas, we let the climactic fireworks commence. On the wedding day, the planned attack by the Titans, Justice League, and villains upon the Houses of Steel and Thunder gets underway. The losses are heavy upon both sides. Wonder Woman, the former Wonder Girl, is killed in battle by Superwoman, formerly Wonder Woman, who is herself killed by Captain Atom. Superboy is also killed, along with most of the Justice League, Titans, and supervillains. Captain Marvel, who has been expecting the attack after being warned by Constantine, is unharmed, while Captain Marvel Jr. and Mary Marvel decide to take advantage of the confusion to flee into space, where they hope to make a new home. Supergirl goes with them. This leaves only Captain Marvel and a badly battered Superman standing amongst the bruised and bloodied remnants of an army of beaten superheroes. The attempted coup by the Titans and Justice League has been successfully repulsed, and three houses lie shattered, but all that remain of the two most powerful houses of all are the two archetypal superheroes standing back to back, waiting for what's going to be thrown at them next. This turns out to be the alien invasion. Arriving by Zeta Beam, an army of Hawkmen, Lanterns, and Martians pour into Earth and quickly get rid of what remains of the armies recruited by the Houses of Titans, Justice, and Secrets in their failed attempt at a coup. They then advance upon the main palaces. Superman isn't worried, since with Captain Marvel by his side, the two of them should still be just about powerful enough to send the invaders packing. This is where the surprise card is played. Captain Marvel isn't Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel has been dead ever since the story opened. It all started with little Billy Batson and his problem. There he was, unwilling to give up being human, still spending a lot of time in a child's body. The unfortunate thing was that though little Billy's body didn't age, his mind did. Trapped in a child's body, but afflicted with adult needs, Billy went quietly Well, bats, I suppose. A lot of the problems were sexual. Physically, Billy was not capable of normal sex, and thus pretty soon began to experiment with more bizarre variations, such as S&M, visiting the appropriate bars in clothing that made him look as grown up as possible, while he still had the face and body of a child. At a certain club, on a certain night, Billy had met a strikingly tall call girl who seemed to meet his every fantasy requirement. They went to a room upstairs together and locked it from within. Billy was tied up and then agreed to be gagged. At this point, the call girl began to melt and change shape, shimmering as if through a heat haze before Billy's startled eyes. In the end, instead of a 6'6" human woman, Billy is staring at a 7.5-foot tall green Martian man. It is John Jones, the Martian Manhunter, on Earth incognito using his power of disguise. Billy, being gagged, cannot say Shazam and turn into Captain Marvel, nor can he prevent the Manhunter snapping his neck with one blow of his hand. The Manhunter then walks out invisibly through the walls and leaves an insoluble mystery. The Manhunter has assumed the Captain's identity, being able to convincingly duplicate his powers in order to catch Superman by surprise when the alien invasion finally comes. This is why he flinched when Constantine struck a match, and why he didn't mind letting the 3 rebel houses and the Houses of Steel tear each other to bits. Upon realizing how he's been set up, Superman fights with the Martian Manhunter, killing him with his heat vision. However, by this point it is too late, and the assembled Martians and Green Lanterns have arrived. With a powerful and intense sequence where Superman manages to smash his way through a lot of the alien forces single-handed while being ring-whipped by the Lanterns, only to finally be beaten to death in single combat with the massive and frighteningly powerful Sodal yacht. The alien invasion is a complete success, and the coalition forces of the Martians, Guardians, and Thanagarians will now govern Earth forever and keep it nice and peaceful. It seems that in his dealings, Constantine's plan had gone awry, unless he actually meant to impose an alien dictatorship upon the Earth. It is at this point that the final pieces fall into place. The alien conquerors find themselves suddenly attacked by a small army of superheroes, those mostly being those recruited by Constantine, as well as the forces of the Council made up of Batman, the Shadow, etc. Most of these are wearing thin golden armor made from the body of the unfortunate Gold, which renders the otherwise omnipotent power rings of the Green Lanterns useless. The aliens are driven back and contained by the surprise attack of the others. And one of the Hawk people, or Green Lanterns, points out that however valiantly the heroes fight, there is a massive army of combined extraterrestrial warriors ready to keep pouring onto the Earth until all resistance is squashed. It is at this point that Constantine plays his trump card. Using the Mobius chair of Metron, Constantine has visited the antimatter universe of Quad. In return for a firm promise of immunity for the planet Earth and its immediate system, Constantine has sold them the secret of the boom tube, which he has also managed to wheedle from Metron. Thus, while the assembled aliens are preparing to pour into Earth via Zeta Beam, Thanagar, New Mars, Ran, and Oa are currently being overrun by a vast army of Quadian weaponeers. Stunned, the aliens are forced to return quickly to their respective homes to fight wars upon their own soil that might take them centuries to win, if they win them at all. For the most part, the only heroes left on Earth are the non-powered variety, and most of these are more than prepared to take off their masks and go public. Constantine explains to them that under the guidance of Batman, the Shadow, and all the rest, American society, free of government or a super dictatorship, will start to organize itself along different lines so that it can deal with the future without fear or anxiety. The days of the big powers are over, and henceforth America will be built up from much smaller and more flexible units, both socially and economically. The story of the Twilight ends with a delighted John Constantine standing at the verge of a new utopia, free from the interferences of power, all superfolk banished from the Earth forever. Of course, the story that he gives to Rip Hunter to take back to his past self, while it gives the gist of all this, doesn't give the whole story. This comes home to the younger Constantine right at the very end of the series, when we wrap up the framing device. Somewhere earlier on in the continuity, we'll have a scene where somebody says to Constantine that if he isn't careful, One day he'll run into somebody craftier than himself and get into a whole mess of trouble. To which Constantine replies confidently and with some justification that there isn't anybody smarter than him. At the very end of this series, he finds out differently. Having contacted all the hero groups and people involved and met with varying responses, Constantine is disturbed. Has he failed? Some of the people he warned have taken his advice, some haven't. Some he hasn't been able to reach at all. He is still thinking of this event in the future as being a terrible thing, and he fears that he might not have averted it well enough. All he has for consolation is the knowledge that, according to Hunter, at some point in this future, he's going to meet a woman who he will love very much for the rest of his life, and who will fill a big lonely hole in him. He even knows, thanks to Hunter, she'll come up to him in a bar and ask him for a light. Their eyes will meet, and that will be that. While he is musing over the pros and cons of this, Hunter delivers the last part of his message from the future Constantine, which he has been instructed not to give to the younger Constantine until after he has warned as many people as he can. Surprised, Constantine reads what may turn out to be the ultimate Dear John letter. Written by his future self, the letter apologizes for using his younger self so cynically, but assures John the younger that it's all for the best. The older Constantine, having the advantage of hindsight, can remember everything that happened to his younger self, including the meeting with Rip Hunter, getting told a terrible story, and then launching on a mission to warn everybody affected of what waited in their future and how they might avert it. The elder Constantine can even remember how that all worked out. The world of Twilight came about anyway, often because of people's actions in response to his warning. He can even remember getting a letter handed to him exactly the same as this one. He muses briefly over the paradox of who really wrote the letter originally before apologizing to his younger self and consoling him with the fact that a wonderful woman is waiting in his near future and that she will be worth everything. Reading the letter, the younger Constantine is furious. It has turned out that there is someone craftier than John Constantine, namely John Constantine, 20 years older and smarter. Constantine has been conned by himself. Worse, since the person who tricked him is 20 years away in an unreachable future, Constantine has no way of getting vengeance upon the person who did this to him. Angered and enraged, he goes into a bar and sits with the crumpled letter in his hand, getting drunk. This is the end of the story, and we have only a final one-page epilogue that takes us back to the beginning, now that we've come full circle. The woman enters the bar and notices John, asking him for a light. He looks up, and their eyes meet. She is beautiful. He knows instantly that he could love this woman forever, knows who she is, knows how happy him and all his future selves are going to be with her, and finally, perversely, he understands how he can have his revenge against his future self, and how he can avert the circumstances that lead to Twilight by throwing a small but important spanner into the workings of destiny. "Excuse me, have you got a light?" Constantine looks at her and blinks twice before replying, "No, I'm sorry, I don't smoke." The woman shrugs and after a while leaves the bar without speaking to Constantine any further. After she's gone, he sits, dead drunk, at a dimly lit corner table and cries his cold and cynical heart out. And that's it. I hope you can see how it's meant to fulfill all the requirements mentioned earlier. There are opportunities for new characters to get a springboard, old characters to get a shot in the arm, and all the merchandising you can handle in terms of games and stuff, at least as I see it. The Warring Houses idea sounds ideal for role-playing games, or maybe even a video game. The overall continuity is hopefully enhanced without being damaged in any irreversible way, and I think we might get a damn good yarn out of it in the bargain. Anyway, I seem to have gone on far longer than I intended, so I better wrap this up. I'll be looking forward with interest to hearing what any of you have to say about all of this when you've had the chance to read it. If any sections are incomprehensible and need clarifying, please give me a call.